But so I'm wondering, yeah, anything that Carla or I have shown, does it make sense to you? Does it seem useful?
Well, the last part, I think it was a little bit over me, but you know, there's parts of it that I think are really, really interesting. And I do think that, you know, I showed this slide about the construction side, and that is for me still mind-boggling how little, you know, the way that we are constructing has changed. And that question crossed my mind all the time. I mean, even back then, you know, when we were all, I mean, I was the child of, let's say, the early 2000s, of the times when we were all, you know, into kind of parametric design, and that was when it first really came to the fore. And the frustration there was always how little that had an impact on the construction industry. And so that's, I think it's still a question we have to ask ourselves, is how do we make this applicable in a way where, you know, it really makes a larger impact, because that technology is there, right? And so there must be some way, like right now we're still stuck in this kind of let's trust a BIM model, but the BIM model is as cumbersome as everything that we've imagined before, if not more so, and it's not about collaboration. It's just about making sure there's no errors, but that's not collaboration. That has no creativity involved.
Right. And so maybe you can just directly react to that, Carla.
So something that I didn't share that I've been thinking while listening to you two is that the difference that I see between AI and human intelligence is that with human intelligence you have imagination, which is something that we cannot achieve with machine intelligence, which I think is knowledge. I think now with your graph about data, information, all of that, I think machine learning and AI is very good at understanding, let's say, and then creating knowledge, because it just discovers things. But I think we humans do something else, which is imagining. So creativity comes with imagination, and I think that's something that machines cannot do and won't do. And therefore, the complementary approach between having knowledge, discovery, and imagination, creativity is something that we have to see how to make it happen every time we have a project. So,
I mean, I think maybe to go to that as well is that if I'm imagining, you know, what happens at a table when we're talking with the engineers, which is, you know, very often the case when we're working on a project, we have these intensive workshop moments where we're sitting all at the same table and we're trying to hash through, you know, some issue, let's say, that we're confronted with. Is that it's not a clear process, because also, you know, I think sometimes with machines, the tendency is that it's limited by what we tell it to look for. And it maybe doesn't extrapolate between things that maybe were not created in that world that was constructed for it. And sometimes the best solutions come out when somebody, you know, throws an idea into the mix that wasn't what we were anticipating, that didn't come from previous conversations, and maybe was from somewhere totally different than what we were imagining, and that kind of starts the conversation going in a different direction. Mm-hmm. And so I think this kind of way of, you know, being able to grab from different sources that maybe is not predetermined is, for me, the nature and the beauty of collaboration, is that when you can find that kind of intersection. And so the question is, how do we provide these types of, you know, possibilities, let's say, in the AI world? Because one of my fears, let's say, in kind of trusting too much in the AI is, you know, is it correct to make decisions purely on data points of saying this is the best in terms of all the kind of, you know, boxes being checked? Or is there actually sometimes a solution that's better because the parameters were slightly different, that don't fit into those boxes, that maybe is red even in one of them, but actually if we were to look at it from a very different perspective, will be a better solution in the long run? And so that question, and also about the, you know, how we look at it, like, is it about this immediate solution right now, or is it about the time frame? I mean, what I was trying to introduce, and I'm not sure if that was successful or not, but this idea of time and how we think about time within the way that we design and build was not in our consciousness before. We were building for a thing, and that was fixed, right? So we didn't have to think about how that would change. And when you add that factor of time, a lot of the decisions that you made and whether or not it was good completely changes.
If you let me, I would like to react. But then I think I will give you the path to where I think you're going. So when you're saying, is there a way that we can have an AI, like if there is an optimal solution, maybe that's not the solution that I want because there is not, that it can be questionable. So if you remember this figure that I had with the curve, the normally distributed curve, and then data algorithms are learning within the bell of the curve, and then I said what's happening on the edges, and I think exactly there on the edges were these collaborative examples that you're just describing, which were not included in the main data set. Because what I think AI is doing is not giving you the solution, it's pointing towards, it's giving you a vector. It's telling you, hey, I know this is out there. Do you want that? Or it's just showing you what is out there, and so therefore you can build upon that and do something else. And I think this is very interesting when you think about data sets. Because there is a lot of discussions about whether biased on data sets, especially because AI learns from the past, which means that everything that we have produced is something that AI will take and learn and predict upon. So I think we are lucky enough that bias is not something that we have to care, because we are designers, we are architects, and we are biased by profession. So we are biased by saying we have these preferences, we design in this way. And so for us, bias is not something bad. We are looking for bias because we are trained to design in a particular way, have preferences, and express us. Okay, then.
But actually, I disagree. Because I agree with you. For example, also in your work, I would say it's obviously a very biased data set in many ways, right? And also, right, because if you say, yeah, I go to the edge of the probability distribution, is this going to be a safe structure? Probably not, unless we have some human expert that has already labeled and said, okay, all of those are okay, right? So I see there's somehow a contradiction, right, between, I think the sensible solutions tend to cluster around the middle. But anyway, my real disagreement is that when we have these, and indeed, even if we look at, let's say, the realm of possible pictures in Midjourney, it's also this kind of distribution, it basically feeds our own biases back into us. Right, and so I have this really nice example where there's an architect in Singapore who is asking Midjourney, give me a building design that is adapted to the local context. And what he gets are like these quasi-organic glass and steel buildings that have trees all over them. And he's like despairing and saying, why do I get all this Gaudi style, is what he said. And I say, yeah, that makes sense, because this is all, the whole of Instagram is in there, right? And it's just giving it back to you. And so when Patrick Schumacher says, yeah, I use Midjourney, and I type Zaha Hadid Museum, and then I give that to my design team, yeah, so you're just completely mirroring yourself, and I would actually say that is the death of creativity. Maybe you want to react to that.
Well, I mean, I agree to some extent with what you were saying, because I feel like, so it's this question of bias, I understand what you're saying as well, is that, you know, we are looking to be approaching things from a particular point of view, but when we do that as humans, we do that with an intention. And then sometimes what, you know, and this goes back to what I was saying as my fear, let's say, of the AI, is that it's a bias that we may not even be aware of, because it was kind of fed by somebody else, but we receive it through this other stuff, you know, so how do we, you know, and so when you brought up in your presentation about transparency, you know, I think that's kind of interesting, of how transparency could lead us to making better decisions, but also in that transparency, like, for example, in those, I'm kind of curious as well, like what, you know, if you had put in different words and different weights in how you evaluate something, you know, would that have changed, for example, the evaluation, like in this kind of model that you were doing with Gruner for the urban design and things like that? That really depends on human input of how you evaluate something, right? And so if we, you know, use data or words to describe things from 50 years ago, it's very different from now. and very different probably from 20 years from now of what we would see as being important.
Yeah, but I would actually say, unfortunately, in terms of the data models we use for collaboration, that's not the case. We are using the things from 40 years ago. But we have 4 minutes left, and so I would like to open things up to the audience.
One last thing. So, and then I think I'm going to be very brief. I think I haven't slept for 24 hours, and my mind is not bright. I wanted to talk about the AI can answer anything. It just depends on the question you ask. So the question of saying, give me an architecture that is cultural, I don't remember exactly what was the prompt, is not a good question to ask. So I think the moment you bring to the table that we are now challenged to reason and come up with questions that are reasonable, not reasonable, but that should be answered, and the answer not always is AI, and that's why I say, before we start a project, we need to think if we really need to have AI or not. Because AI is not the answer. It won't be the answer.
That I agree with you. But you have to be almost more intelligent than the AI.
But we have different intelligence. Not more, different intelligence. Yes.
Thanks a lot. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I think it was a very interesting lineup speakers. On one side, we are talking about quantitative performance. That means we are trying to make the design question a deterministic question, and we are trying to find the right answer. And on the other side, we are talking about flexibility, and we are talking about the aspects that we cannot really control. So I'm thinking that with the optimization questions, are we trying to answer the question of design or the question at hand as a unique answer because we think that this one thing is right and this one thing is actually right at the moment? And are we trying to answer with flexibility with a platform or some sort of standard that in the future can become something it's free and it become whatever we want it to be? How these two approaches can meet in the middle, or does one eliminate the other? Or if I want to make the question very simple, how Jeanette and Thomas or Carla together will design a building together? How would that work, these two?
I mean, I think I could answer. So I think one answer is just, we're going to use knowledge graphs, right? Because this is a way to model basically everything, and we can agree, and everybody can model in the way they want, and then we can connect and make decisions. So that is one answer. Another answer is to say, yeah, of course, it's not about the optimal thing, right? And that's what I try to show, but it's more about, it's again about this kind of mirror. It's saying, okay, if you have set up this parametric model in this way and you actually care about your embodied CO2 and your thermal performance, then this is kind of how your decision space looks like. And this is what we call performance-informed design. I think this is what all architects, I think now they should be able to do this, to know, okay, I'm doing this. It's probably, maybe this is not the building design with the least embodied CO2, but I have a lot of other good reasons, right, why I'm doing it the way I'm doing it. And this is what I mean with transparency. And so there I actually see value in the quantitative approach. So I do actually believe to try and make as many qualities as we can quantitative, not that we can then just optimize and choose the best, but just so that we can have an honest conversation about what's actually happening.
How we can, just as a quick addition to that, but how we can put a quantitative performance on flexibility that will happen in the future?
I don't think we can put a quantitative quality on that. I think that, well, and that's maybe something that you guys can answer better than I can. I think that, at the end of the day, I don't think there's a formula for any of these things. And I think that's the beauty of the AI, is that it takes us away from what we used to have as computational design, which is more formulaic, and into something which is more interactive and more collaborative, let's say. And I think that this question of the flexibility, yes, you cannot predict what goes on in the future, but what we have to build knowing what we know now. We have to commit to something. And it's to the best of our knowledge to do things that we can understand can go on. And I actually strongly believe that, and this is why, what I was, let's say the pitch that I was trying to make is that the human is still there, and the human has to be taught things that allows him or her to really engage with the technology that comes, because in a way, there's, when we do a design, it will always be biased. It will always have things that we bring into it as a kind of author to it. And it will need to also be a space which is remarkable if it is to stay for a long time. It cannot just be a kind of a generic space. So flexibility just doesn't mean flexibility for everything. It means flexibility for that condition, that situation, at that moment, in the moments that we can foresee for the lifespan of that building.
I think this is an excellent point to close the session. I think we have a break now. And I hope we can continue this very interesting conversation there.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.